They say blood is thicker than water, that family bonds are unbreakable, forged in love and strengthened by years of shared memories. But sometimes the very people you'd sacrifice everything for can cut you deeper than any stranger ever could. My name is Catherine Winters, and for 38 years, I believed that unconditional love and endless support would eventually be rewarded with loyalty and gratitude from my only son. I was devastatingly wrong. What I discovered about who really owned the mansion my son and daughter-in-law called their dream home would change everything between us forever and expose a web of lies that had been spinning around me for years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The moment I realized my son had completely chosen his wife's family over mine wasn't during the countless holidays I spent alone while they celebrated with the Ashfords. It wasn't when they moved across town to be closer to her parents, leaving me to see my grandchildren maybe once every few months. It wasn't even when my daughter-in-law Penelope looked me straight in the eye and said, "Catherine, we really think it would be better if you didn't come to Jamie's birthday party this year. The Ashfords are planning something very special and intimate, and honestly, your presence might make things awkward." No. The moment I truly understood how little I meant to my son David was when I stood outside the gates of their gorgeous estate in Willowbrook Heights, a home I had been told they worked so hard to afford. Watching through the ornate iron bars as 3 generations of Ashfords celebrated my grandson's graduation from private school. My invitation had somehow gotten lost in the mail, but apparently every Ashford cousin, aunt, uncle, and family friend had received theirs just fine. I watched my own flesh and blood, the boy I had raised as a single mother after his father walked out when David was just 8 years old, laughing and embracing people who had known him for merely 6 years. Meanwhile, I stood there like a stranger, like some unwelcome observer peering into a life that had once included me. That was the day I decided I'd had enough of being treated like a second-class family member, an embarrassing relative to be managed and minimized. That was the day I made a phone call that would shatter their perfect little world and reveal truths that would leave my son begging for my forgiveness. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, to a small town called Riverside Falls, where I thought I was building a life that would last forever. I was 24 when I married David's father, Michael Winters, in a simple ceremony at the local community center. We couldn't afford anything fancy. I was working as a receptionist at the county courthouse, and Michael was trying to make it as a freelance photographer. We rented a tiny 2-bedroom house on Maple Grove Street with dreams of filling it with children and laughter. David came along 2 years later, a beautiful, healthy baby boy who became the center of my universe. For the first 8 years of his life, we were a happy little family. Sure, money was always tight, and Michael's photography business never quite took off the way we had hoped, but we had love, we had dreams, and we had each other. Then everything fell apart. Michael's midlife crisis hit like a tornado. One day he was my devoted husband and father, and the next he was packing his bags, claiming he needed to find himself, and that family life was, quote, suffocating his artistic spirit. He left on a Tuesday morning in March, taking nothing but his photography equipment and the money from our joint savings account. I came home from work to find a note on the kitchen table and an empty house that suddenly felt enormous and terrifyingly quiet. David was devastated. He kept asking when Daddy was coming home, and I kept making excuses, hoping Michael would come to his senses and return to us. But weeks turned into months, and eventually I had to accept that I was raising my son alone. Those were the hardest years of my life, but also the most meaningful. Every sacrifice I made, working double shifts at the courthouse while taking night classes to become a paralegal, driving a 15-year-old car so David could play Little League, shopping at thrift stores so he could have new school clothes, felt worth it because I was building something beautiful with my son. We were a team, him and me against the world. I watched him grow from a hurt little boy to a confident young man. I was there for every baseball game, every school play, every skinned knee and broken heart. When he graduated high school as valedictorian, I cried tears of pure pride. When he got a full scholarship to Northfield University, I knew that all those years of sacrifice had been worth it. David studied business and finance, and even from college, he would call me every Sunday night to tell me about his classes, his friends, his dreams of starting his own investment firm someday. Those phone calls were the highlight of my week. He would say things like, "Mom, when I make it big, I'm going to buy you the most beautiful house you've ever seen. You deserve everything after what you've done for me." I never asked for grand gestures or expensive gifts. I just wanted to remain close to my son, to be part of his life as he built his future. I wanted to be the grandmother who got to babysit and spoil his children, the mother-in-law who was welcomed and appreciated, not merely tolerated. But life, as I would learn, had very different plans for me. During his senior year at Northfield, David met Penelope Ashford at some exclusive campus charity gala. She was everything I wasn't: polished, sophisticated, from old money that stretched back generations. Her family owned half the commercial real estate in the neighboring city of Grandview, along with a portfolio of investments that most people could only dream about. From the moment David brought her home for Thanksgiving that year, I could see the wheels turning in his head. This wasn't just a girlfriend. This was his ticket into a world he'd only glimpsed from the outside. And I was suddenly a liability, a reminder of his humble beginnings that didn't fit with the image he wanted to project as Penelope's boyfriend. The changes were subtle at first, but they cut deep. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you were enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The breaking point didn't come during a heated argument or a dramatic confrontation. It came on a perfectly ordinary Thursday afternoon in September, delivered through a text message that would haunt me for months to come. I was sitting in my small office at Henderson & Associates, where I'd worked as a senior paralegal for the past 15 years, when my phone buzzed. It was from David. And at first glance, it seemed like wonderful news. "Mom, great news! Jamie got accepted to Prestwick Academy for next year. The Ashfords are throwing a celebration dinner this Saturday at the country club. Can't wait to share this moment with family." My heart soared. Prestwick Academy was the most exclusive private school in the state, and my grandson Jamie was only 10 years old. Getting accepted there was incredibly prestigious, and I felt such pride knowing that my brilliant grandson would have opportunities I could never have dreamed of at his age. I immediately started planning what I would wear, thinking about what gift would be appropriate for such a momentous occasion. Maybe I could get Jamie that advanced chess set he'd been wanting, or perhaps a nice fountain pen to mark this academic milestone. I texted back, "Congratulations to Jamie. I'm so proud. What time should I be there on Saturday? Should I bring anything special?" The response came 20 minutes later, and it destroyed something fundamental inside me. "Oh, Mom, I should have been clearer. This is really an Ashford family celebration. You know how formal these country club events can be, and Penelope's parents have already made all the arrangements with their social circle. It would probably be awkward to change the guest list now, but don't worry, we'll definitely celebrate with you separately sometime soon." I read those words 3 times, certain I was misunderstanding something. My grandson, my only grandchild, was achieving something incredible, and I wasn't invited to celebrate because it might be awkward for the Ashfords? I sat there in my office, surrounded by legal briefs and case files, and felt more alone than I had since Michael walked out 26 years ago. But this was worse. Michael was a selfish man who abandoned his responsibilities. David was my son, someone I had poured my entire life into, and he was deliberately excluding me from one of the most important moments in my grandson's young life. I tried calling David directly, but it went straight to voicemail. When I tried again an hour later, Penelope answered his phone. "Oh, Catherine," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone of polite condescension she'd perfected over the years. David stepped away from his desk. Was there something urgent? I wanted to talk to him about Saturday, about Jamie's celebration. There was a pause, and I could practically hear her calculating how to handle this delicate situation. I understand you might be disappointed, but you have to understand that this is really a milestone that means a lot to my family. My father and grandfather both attended Prestwick Academy, and having Jamie accepted continues a family legacy that goes back generations. It's quite meaningful for the Ashfords. I'm Jamie's grandmother. This is meaningful for me too.
Of course, Penelope replied smoothly, but you have to understand the context. This celebration is happening at Grandview Country Club, where my family has been members for over 40 years. There will be board members there, family friends who've known the Ashfords since before David was even in the picture. It's a very specific social environment. The implication was crystal clear. I didn't belong in their specific social environment. I wasn't polished enough, wealthy enough, or connected enough to sit at the same table as the Ashford family and their prestigious friends. "What about Jamie?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Does he know I won't be there?" Another pause. "Jamie understands that different occasions call for different family configurations. He's a very mature child." That phrase, different family configurations, hit me like a physical blow. In Penelope's mind, there were two separate families: the important Ashford family that mattered for public occasions, and then there was me, relegated to private, informal visits that wouldn't interfere with their social standing. "I see," I said, though I was far from seeing clearly through the tears that were threatening to spill over. "Well, please tell David I called." "I certainly will. And, Catherine, we really should plan something nice for just the three of you and Jamie soon. Maybe a quiet dinner at home where you can really celebrate properly." She hung up, and I sat there holding my phone, staring at the blank screen. A quiet dinner at home, hidden away from the public celebration, from the formal recognition, from the community that was supposed to matter to my family. For 38 years, I had told myself that David's gradual distancing was natural, that young men needed to establish their independence, that marriage naturally shifted family priorities. I had made excuses for every missed holiday, every shortened phone call, every time I felt like an outsider looking in at their perfect life. But this was different. This wasn't about independence or natural life transitions. This was about shame. My own son was ashamed of me, ashamed of where he came from, ashamed of the woman who had sacrificed everything to give him the foundation that made his current success possible. That evening, I drove to my small house on Elm Street, the same house I'd been living in for 20 years, the same house where David had grown up, where we'd celebrated his high school graduation, where he'd brought Penelope for the first time 6 years ago. I sat in my modest living room, surrounded by family photos that told the story of our life together, and I made a decision that would change everything. I picked up my phone and called my brother Thomas in Denver. Thomas and I had maintained a close relationship despite the distance, and he was one of the few people who knew the complete truth about my situation with David and the Ashfords. "Catherine," he said warmly when he answered, "what a nice surprise. How are you doing?" "Thomas," I said, my voice shaking slightly, "I need to ask you something important, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Of course. What's going on?" I took a deep breath. "Do you think I'm an embarrassment to David? Do you think I'm not good enough for his new life?" The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. "Catherine," Thomas said finally, his voice gentle but firm, "you're one of the strongest, most dignified women I've ever known. You raised an incredible son under impossible circumstances. If David can't see that, if he's so blinded by social climbing that he's forgotten where he came from and who helped him get there, then the problem isn't with you. But maybe I should try harder, I said, voicing the thoughts that had been plaguing me for years. Maybe I should dress differently, learn about wine and art and all the things the Ashfords talk about. Maybe I should... Stop, Thomas interrupted. Just stop. You should never have to diminish yourself to earn your own son's respect. And you certainly shouldn't have to earn the right to celebrate your grandson's achievements. After we hung up, I sat in the silence of my living room and made a decision that would change everything. I was done begging for scraps of my son's attention. I was done accepting being treated as a second-class family member. I was done pretending that their behavior was normal or acceptable. But I had no idea that within just a few short weeks, a single phone call would reveal secrets that would turn David and Penelope's world upside down and force my son to confront the truth about everything he thought he knew about his new family's wealth and status. The truth about who really owned that beautiful mansion in Willowbrook Heights was going to change everything. The story of how I became someone my own son could discard so easily begins long before Penelope Ashford entered our lives. It starts in the autumn of 1987, when David was 8 years old, and our world collapsed in a single morning.
I remember that Tuesday like it was yesterday. I had gotten up early to pack David's lunch, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches cut into triangles the way he liked them, an apple and a juice box. Michael was still sleeping when I left for work at the courthouse, which wasn't unusual. His photography business had been struggling for months, and he'd been staying up late working on his portfolio, though I suspected he was mostly just drinking beer and feeling sorry for himself. When I came home that evening, the house felt different. Empty. Not just quiet, actually empty, like the life had been sucked out of it. David was at his friend Tommy's house, which Michael knew, and that's when I found the note. "Catherine," it read in Michael's familiar scrawl. "I can't do this anymore. I'm suffocating here. I need to find out who I am beyond being a husband and father. I've taken what I need to get started somewhere new. Don't try to find me. This is better for everyone. Michael." He had cleaned out our savings account, all $3,200 of it, and taken his camera equipment. He left behind a mortgage, a car payment, credit card debt, and an 8-year-old boy who would spend the next 6 months asking when Daddy was coming home. I sat on our secondhand couch that night, holding that note and trying to figure out how I was going to survive. My salary as a courthouse receptionist barely covered half our monthly expenses. Michael's sporadic photography income had been essential, even when it was unreliable. Now I was facing the very real possibility of losing our home. But as I looked around that little house on Maple Grove Street, the house where David had taken his first steps, where we'd celebrated his birthdays, where he felt safe and loved, I made a promise to myself and to my son. Whatever it took, I would keep us afloat. I would give David the stability his father had stolen from him. The next morning, I enrolled in night classes at the community college to become a paralegal. During the day, I worked at the courthouse. Evenings, I studied while David did his homework at the kitchen table beside me. Weekends, I picked up cleaning jobs for extra money. Mrs. Patterson next door watched David when I couldn't be there, refusing to take payment no matter how many times I insisted. Those were exhausting years, but they were also some of the most precious times David and I ever shared. We developed rituals that bonded us closer than ever. Sunday morning pancakes shaped like animals, Friday night movie marathons with popcorn made on the stove, Saturday afternoon trips to the library where we'd each pick out books to read during the week. David never complained about our modest lifestyle. When other kids had name-brand sneakers, he wore the perfectly good ones from Payless with pride. When his friends got expensive video game systems, he was content with the used Nintendo I'd found at a garage sale. He seemed to understand, even at that young age, that we were a team working towards something better. "Mom," he told me one evening when he was 12, as we worked together on his science fair project at our kitchen table, "when I grow up, I'm going to take care of you the way you take care of me. You'll never have to work so hard again." Those words meant everything to me. They sustained me through the double shifts and the exhaustion and the loneliness of raising a child completely on my own. By the time David was in high school, I had established myself as one of the most reliable paralegals in the county. My salary had increased substantially, and I was finally able to provide David with some of the things his friends had: better clothes, a decent car when he turned 16, money for school trips and activities. David flourished academically. He was student council president, captain of the debate team, and graduated as valedictorian with a 4.0 GPA. The guidance counselor told me she'd never seen a student more focused and driven. "She talks about you constantly," she said, "about how hard you've worked to give him opportunities. You should be very proud." I was proud, incredibly, overwhelmingly proud. And when David received that full scholarship to Northfield University, I felt like every sacrifice had been vindicated. I had done it. I had raised a successful, confident, caring young man despite all the obstacles we'd faced. During his first 3 years of college, David came home every few weeks. He'd bring his laundry, and we'd spend the weekend together, talking about his classes, his plans for the future, his dreams of starting his own investment firm. He still called me every Sunday night without fail, and those conversations were the highlight of my week. "I'm thinking about specializing in portfolio management for high net worth individuals," he told me during one of those calls in his junior year. "There's real money in that field, Mom. I could make enough to support both of us comfortably."
Just focus on doing what makes you happy, I always told him. The money will follow if you're doing something you love. But I could hear the ambition in his voice, the hunger for financial success that went beyond just wanting to provide for us. Michael's abandonment had left David with a deep need to prove himself, to ensure he would never be vulnerable the way we had been when his father left. I understood that drive, even supported it, but I sometimes worried about where it might lead him. The first hint of change came during David's senior year, right around Thanksgiving. He called me 3 weeks before the holiday to tell me he was bringing someone home, a girlfriend named Penelope. "She's really special, Mom," he said, and I could hear something different in his voice. An excitement, yes, but also a nervous energy I hadn't heard before. Her family is from Grandview, and they're pretty prominent in the community. I really want you to like her." The way he said prominent should have been my first warning, but I was just excited that my son had found someone who made him happy. I spent 2 weeks preparing for their visit, cleaning the house from top to bottom, planning meals that would show Penelope how much I cared about David's happiness. When they arrived that Thanksgiving Thursday, I knew immediately that we were from completely different worlds. Penelope stepped out of David's car wearing clothes that probably cost more than I made in a month. Her posture, her speech, even the way she looked around our neighborhood, everything about her radiated privilege and money. But she was polite during that first visit, complimenting my cooking and asking appropriate questions about my work. David seemed nervous, hovering around both of us, clearly desperate for us to get along. After dinner, when Penelope excused herself to use the bathroom, David grabbed my hands. "What do you think? Isn't she amazing?" "She seems lovely," I said honestly. "If she makes you happy, I'm happy." But even then, I noticed things that made me uneasy. The way Penelope's eyes lingered on our modest furniture, taking inventory of what we didn't have. The careful way she phrased compliments about the house. "Your home is so cozy," and "I love how you've made the most of this space." Most telling of all was how she spoke about her own family. "Daddy just bought Mama a new Mercedes for her birthday. She was getting tired of the BMW. And we're renovating our summer house in the Hamptons this year. Mama wants to update the guest wing." David hung on every word, asking questions about the renovations, the cars, the country club memberships she mentioned so casually. I watched my son's face transform as Penelope described a world of wealth and luxury he'd only imagined, and I saw something that broke my heart. Hunger. Not just for the money, but for the social status, the respectability, the sense of belonging to something bigger and more important than our small-town life.
After they left that weekend, David's phone calls began to change. Instead of asking about my work or sharing details about his classes, he started talking about Penelope's family constantly. The business deals her father was involved in, the charity galas her mother organized, the influential people they knew. Mr. Ashford offered to introduce me to some contacts in the investment world, he told me during one Sunday call. He knows everyone in Grandview's financial district. This could really open doors for me, Mom. I should have seen it then, the beginning of the slow drift away from me and toward the world the Ashfords represented. But I was still operating under the assumption that David's love for me was unconditional, the way mine was for him. I thought his excitement about Penelope's family was just natural enthusiasm for new experiences. I had no idea that I was watching my son's transformation from the grateful, loving boy who had promised to take care of me into someone who would eventually see me as an obstacle to overcome, rather than the foundation upon which his success was built. The seeds of my eventual heartbreak were planted that Thanksgiving weekend, though it would take years for me to recognize them for what they were. The transformation didn't happen overnight. Like watching someone you love slowly disappear into an addiction, David's drift toward the Ashford world was gradual enough that I could rationalize each small change, each subtle shift in his priorities, each new expectation that somehow I was supposed to understand and accommodate. It started with the graduation ceremony in May. David had initially planned a small celebration, just him, me, and maybe a few close friends from college. We had talked about going to Romano's, the Italian restaurant where we'd celebrated his high school graduation 4 years earlier. It was our tradition, our special place. 2 weeks before graduation, everything changed.
Mom, slight change of plans, David said during our Sunday phone call. Penelope's parents want to host a graduation dinner at the Grandview Yacht Club. It's really generous of them, and Mr. Ashford says it's important for me to start networking with the right people if I want to succeed in finance. My heart sank, but I tried to be supportive. That sounds wonderful, sweetheart. Should I drive up early to meet you before the ceremony? There was a pause. Actually, the Ashfords have reserved a private suite overlooking the harbor. It's pretty exclusive. I think there's a dress code and everything. Maybe we could do our own celebration the next day? Just you and me, like old times? The message was clear. I didn't belong at the exclusive yacht club with the important people David needed to impress. Romano's was fine for our old times, but his new life required more sophisticated venues where my presence might be awkward or embarrassing. I swallowed my disappointment and agreed. Of course, honey, whatever works best for you. But when I arrived in Northfield for graduation, I discovered that our private celebration had been pushed back again. Penelope's family had planned a weekend getaway to their summer house, and David felt it was important to join them. It's business networking disguised as fun, he explained. Mr. Ashford wants to introduce me to some of his golf buddies who run investment firms. I attended David's graduation ceremony alone, sitting in the general seating area while the Ashfords occupied premium seats in the VIP section. I watched my son walk across that stage, the son I had worked double shifts to support, whose college applications I had helped him fill out, whose dreams I had nurtured through every setback. And I felt like a stranger observing someone else's triumph. After the ceremony, David found me in the crowd and gave me a quick hug. Thanks for coming, Mom. This means everything to me. But even as he spoke, his eyes were scanning the crowd for Penelope and her family. When he spotted them, his attention immediately shifted. I should go. The Ashfords are waiting and we have that dinner reservation, but I'll call you this week and we'll definitely plan something soon. That something soon never materialized. Instead, David moved directly from college to Grandview, where he started working at Ashford and Associates, Mr. Ashford's investment firm. Penelope had somehow arranged for David to bypass the normal entry-level positions and start as a junior advisor, with a salary that was probably triple what I made, as a paralegal. It's not nepotism, David explained when I expressed surprise at how quickly everything had fallen into place. Mr. Ashford says I have real potential. He sees something in me that other employers might not recognize right away.
What Mr. Ashford saw, I suspected, was an ambitious young man hungry enough for acceptance that he would work twice as hard as anyone else to prove he belonged in their world. And the price of that belonging was becoming increasingly clear. Distance from anything that reminded the Ashfords, or David himself, of his humble origins. The Sunday phone calls, which had been sacred to us for years, became sporadic and brief. When David did call, our conversations were dominated by updates about his work, Penelope's social activities, and the Ashford family's various business ventures and charitable commitments. Penelope and I went to this amazing fundraiser for the Children's Hospital, he told me during one call. Mrs. Ashford organized the whole thing. They raised over $100,000 in one evening. Can you imagine? These people really know how to get things done. I had been volunteering at our local food bank for years, organizing donation drives and serving meals to families in need. But somehow, my community service didn't warrant the same admiration. It wasn't glamorous enough, didn't involve the right people, didn't generate the kind of impressive numbers that sounded good at cocktail parties. When David and Penelope got engaged 8 months after graduation, I learned about it through a Facebook post. Not a phone call, not a personal conversation, a social media announcement featuring professional photos of the couple at some scenic location I didn't recognize, Penelope's diamond ring prominently displayed. I called David immediately, hurt and confused. "Honey, I just saw your announcement online. Congratulations. When did this happen?" "Oh, right, I meant to call you. It was kind of spontaneous. We were at the Ashfords beach house in the Outer Banks, and the moment just felt perfect. Penelope's family was there, and everyone was so excited." "I'm excited too," though my voice sounded strained even to my own ears. "Have you thought about when you might want to have the wedding?" "Actually, we're thinking fairly soon. Maybe this fall. Penelope's parents know this amazing event planner who can work miracles even with short notice. Plus, Mrs. Ashford has connections at all the best venues." Everything was happening so fast, being planned by other people, in a world where I had no input or involvement. "I'd love to help with whatever you need," I offered. "I could take some vacation time to help with preparations or—" "That's sweet, Mom, but honestly, Penelope's mother has everything under control. She's done this kind of thing before. Penelope's sister had this incredible wedding at the country club a few years ago. Mrs. Ashford knows exactly how to handle all the details." The wedding planning process became a perfect metaphor for my new role in David's life. Peripheral, unnecessary, occasionally acknowledged, but never truly included. Penelope's mother, Eleanor Ashford, took charge of every detail with the efficiency of someone accustomed to organizing major social events. When I asked about involvement in planning the engagement party, I was told it would be just a small gathering of close family and friends at the Ashford estate. When I inquired about the bridal shower, I learned it was being held at the country club for Penelope's sorority sisters and family friends. When I offered to host a rehearsal dinner, I was informed that the Ashfords had already booked the private dining room at Grandview's most exclusive restaurant. My contributions to David's wedding were carefully managed and minimized. I was allowed to invite 12 people to the ceremony: neighbors, a few colleagues from work, my brother Thomas and his wife. The Ashfords invited over 200 guests, including what seemed like half of Grandview's social and business elite. I spent more on my mother of the groom dress than I had ever spent on any single piece of clothing in my life, desperate to look appropriate for such a formal occasion. When I arrived at the Grandview Country Club on the wedding day, dressed in my carefully chosen navy blue dress and modest jewelry, I felt like I was wearing a costume in a play I didn't understand. The ceremony was beautiful, undeniably elegant, and completely foreign to anything I had ever experienced. David looked handsome in his designer tuxedo, standing at an altar decorated with hundreds of white roses and baby's breath. When the minister asked who was giving Penelope away, her father stepped forward with obvious pride. There was no corresponding moment acknowledging my role in David's life, no recognition of the woman who had actually raised the groom. During the reception, I sat at a table with my small group of invitees, while the Ashfords guests filled 10 tables near the head table where David and Penelope held court. I watched my son work the room with Penelope, introducing her to his new colleagues, laughing at stories I couldn't hear, participating in a social dance I had never taught him because I had never learned the steps myself. The few times David stopped by my table, our interactions felt forced and brief. "Are you having a good time, Mom?" he would ask, and I would smile and assure him I was fine, even though I felt like an observer at my own son's wedding rather than a participant in one of the most important days of his life. When it came time for toasts, Mr. Ashford spoke eloquently about welcoming David into their family, about the bright future ahead for the young couple, about the traditions and values that would guide their marriage. David responded with heartfelt thanks to the Ashfords for their generosity and support. No one mentioned the single mother who had worked multiple jobs to put him through college. No one acknowledged the sacrifices that had made his education and success possible. In the narrative being crafted that evening, David's story began when he met Penelope and joined the Ashford family. As I drove home alone that night, still wearing my expensive dress, I realized that I had just witnessed not only my son's wedding, but also my own quiet erasure from his life story. The pattern was established. The Ashfords would provide the framework for David's future, and I would be relegated to whatever small space remained on the margins. But I told myself this was natural, that newlyweds needed time to establish their own family unit, that once they settled into married life, David would remember how much I meant to him and make more effort to include me. I was wrong. The wedding wasn't the end of a difficult transition period. It was just the beginning of my long, painful exile from my son's life. If you're still with me on this journey, I want to thank you for listening to what I know is a difficult story to hear. Sometimes the hardest truths are the ones about family, about the people we love most in the world. Please hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, because tomorrow I'm sharing something that will show you just how deep family deception can go, and you won't want to miss it. The first year of David and Penelope's marriage was when I truly began to understand my new place in their world, or rather, my lack of place in it. What had started as gradual distancing during their engagement crystallized into a clear hierarchy where the Ashford family occupied the center of their universe, and I existed somewhere in the distant orbit, acknowledged occasionally, but never truly welcomed. The new routine became painfully predictable. Every major holiday, every special occasion, every celebration that mattered was spent with the Ashfords. I received invitations to secondary events, if I was lucky. More often, I learned about family milestones through brief, apologetic phone calls that came after the fact. "Mom, I'm sorry I didn't call sooner," David would say, his voice carrying that particular tone of someone fulfilling an obligation rather than sharing excitement. "Penelope and I had dinner with her parents last night to celebrate my promotion at the firm. I should have mentioned it before, but things have been so hectic." My responses became as predictable as his calls. "That's wonderful news, honey. I'm so proud of you. Maybe we could celebrate together soon." "Absolutely. Things are just crazy right now with work and the holidays coming up, but definitely soon." Soon never came. The promotion David mentioned was to senior investment advisor, a position that typically required 5 years of experience, but which he achieved in 18 months. When I congratulated him and asked about his new responsibilities, he explained that Mr. Ashford had fast-tracked him because of his exceptional performance and potential. What David didn't mention, what I learned months later from a casual comment during one of our increasingly rare conversations, was that the promotion came with a substantial salary increase and, more importantly, access to the Ashford family's most exclusive social circles. David was now earning more money than I had ever dreamed possible, attending charity galas where single tickets cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, and building relationships with Grandview's most influential families. The financial success should have been wonderful news.
I had always dreamed of David achieving the kind of security and prosperity that had eluded us during his childhood. But instead of bringing us closer together, his new wealth seemed to create an even wider gulf between us. When Jamie was born in the spring of David's second year of marriage, I thought surely this would be the bridge back to a meaningful relationship with my son. A grandchild would give us new common ground, a shared focus that transcended social boundaries, and reminded David of what truly mattered. I was partially right. Jamie did become the center of my world, the bright spot that made all the other disappointments bearable. But my access to my grandson was carefully controlled and limited by Penelope and David, as if my influence might somehow contaminate the carefully curated environment they were creating for their son. My visits with Jamie were scheduled around the Ashfords' availability and convenience. When Eleanor Ashford wanted to spend the day with her grandson, my planned visit would be postponed. When the Ashfords had family gatherings, Jamie was expected to attend, regardless of any prior arrangements I might have made with David and Penelope. It's important for Jamie to bond with his grandfather, Penelope explained, when I questioned why my weekend visit had been canceled so that Jamie could attend a golf tournament with Mr. Ashford. Daddy is teaching him about business and responsibility. These are valuable lessons. Jamie was 18 months old at the time. The disparity in how the grandparents were treated became impossible to ignore. Eleanor Ashford had a key to David and Penelope's house and could visit whenever she pleased. She kept her own nursery set up in their guest room so Jamie could spend nights there regularly. She bought him designer clothes and expensive toys, took him to exclusive playgroups with other wealthy children, and planned elaborate birthday parties at venues I couldn't afford to rent for an hour. Meanwhile, my visits required advance notice and approval. I was not trusted with a house key. When I offered to babysit so David and Penelope could have date nights, I was told that Eleanor Ashford enjoyed taking care of Jamie and had more experience with children from wealthy families. The Ashfords understand Jamie's routine better, Penelope explained when I questioned why my weekend visit had been canceled so that Jamie could attend a golf tournament with Mr. Ashford. Daddy is teaching him about business and responsibility. These are valuable lessons. Jamie was 18 months old at the time. The breaking point in this carefully managed relationship came during Jamie's second birthday party. I had been planning for weeks, shopping for the perfect gift, arranging to take the day off work. The party was scheduled for Saturday afternoon at David and Penelope's house, a casual family gathering, according to the invitation I received. When I arrived that Saturday, I discovered that casual family gathering meant something very different than I had understood. The Ashford family was there in force. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, and what appeared to be several family friends with children Jamie's age. The backyard had been transformed with professional decorations, a bounce house, catered food, and a photographer capturing every moment. I stood at the edge of this celebration with my carefully wrapped gift, a wooden train set I had spent months saving for, and watched my grandson being passed around among people who saw him several times a week while I was lucky to see him twice a month. When it came time for gift opening, Jamie was overwhelmed by the sheer volume of presents from the Ashfords. Designer clothes, electronic toys, a miniature electric car that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in 3 months. My wooden train set, which I had chosen because David had loved trains as a child, looked shabby and old-fashioned among the expensive, high-tech gifts. Eleanor Ashford, noticing my gift among the pile, picked it up and examined it with barely concealed disdain. "How traditional," she said, her voice carrying the same tone someone might use to describe an outdated piece of furniture. "Jamie, look what Grandma Catherine brought you. A train set, just like children played with in the old days." The other guests smiled politely, but I caught the exchanged glances, the subtle eye rolls that said they understood this was exactly the kind of gift they would expect from someone like me. Simple, inexpensive, unsophisticated. David, who was standing nearby, didn't defend my gift or redirect the conversation.
Instead, he simply smiled and moved on to the next present, an elaborate wooden kitchen set that cost 10 times what I had spent on groceries. I left the party early, claiming I wasn't feeling well, which was true in every way that mattered. I sat in my car in their driveway for several minutes, watching through the windows as the celebration continued without me, and realized that I had become the obligation guest at my own grandson's birthday party. That evening, David called to check on me. "Mom, are you feeling better? You seemed a little off today." "I'm fine," I lied. It was a lovely party. Jamie seemed to have a wonderful time. He really did. The Ashfords went all out, didn't they? Penelope's mom has such a talent for organizing these things. I wanted to ask why my presence at these events always felt like an afterthought, why my relationship with my grandson was so carefully managed and restricted, why I felt like a stranger in my own son's life. Instead, I said what I always said. I'm just grateful to be included. But I wasn't grateful anymore. I was hurt, frustrated, and increasingly angry at myself for accepting a situation that diminished my worth and limited my relationship with the two people I loved most in the world. I was tired of being treated like a poor relation who should be thankful for whatever scraps of attention I received. The trap I found myself in was insidious and seemingly inescapable. The more I tried to assert myself or express dissatisfaction with how I was being treated, the more I was painted as difficult, demanding, or unable to understand the complexities of their new life. The more I accepted their treatment without complaint, the more they felt justified in marginalizing me further. I was caught between losing my son entirely and accepting a relationship that grew more demeaning with each passing month. Either choice felt like a form of surrender, a betrayal of the woman who had fought so hard to build a life for David and now found herself being systematically erased from the life he had built for himself. What I didn't know was that within just a few months, a completely unexpected phone call would reveal information that would change everything I thought I understood about David's new life and the family that had so effortlessly displaced me in his affections. The awakening to my true situation didn't come all at once. It was a series of small moments, casual observations, and overheard conversations that gradually painted a picture I had been refusing to see clearly. Sometimes the truth reveals itself not in dramatic confrontations, but in the quiet spaces between words, in the things people don't say as much as the things they do. It started with a comment from my neighbor, Helen Morrison, who lived across the street from me on Elm Street. Helen was a retired teacher with a sharp eye for social dynamics and absolutely no filter when it came to speaking her mind. One Saturday morning as I was working in my small front garden, she walked over with her coffee mug, and that expression I had learned meant she had something to say. "Catherine, I saw that fancy car in your driveway again yesterday. Was that your son visiting?" I looked up from the roses I was pruning, pleased to have something positive to share. "Yes, David stopped by with Jamie for about an hour. They were in the neighborhood." Helen's expression shifted slightly. "In the neighborhood? Honey, Willowbrook Heights is 15 miles from here. That's not exactly in the neighborhood unless you're planning to be somewhere specific." I had noticed that David's visits had become increasingly brief and always seemed to coincide with other errands he needed to run. But I had told myself he was just busy, that any time with my grandson was precious regardless of the circumstances.
"What do you mean?" I asked, though part of me already knew where Helen was heading. "I mean, that boy of yours drives a $60,000 BMW and lives in a house that probably costs more than most people make in 5 years. When someone like that visits someone like us, it's usually because they need something or they're fulfilling an obligation." Helen's voice was gentle but direct. "I'm just wondering which one it was yesterday." The question haunted me long after Helen went back to her house. When I really thought about David's recent visits, I realized they had indeed become transactional. He came by when he needed me to sign tax documents he had prepared for me. He stopped in when Penelope was having the house deep cleaned and Jamie needed somewhere to stay for a few hours. He visited when he had news to share that he felt obligated to deliver in person rather than over the phone. But when was the last time David had come by simply because he wanted to spend time with me? When had we last had a conversation that wasn't about his work, his wife, or his in-laws? When had he last asked about my life, my work, my hopes, my concerns? The answer was deeply unsettling. I couldn't remember. This realization led me to start paying closer attention to the dynamics during our interactions, and what I observed made me increasingly uncomfortable. David had developed a habit of checking his phone constantly during our visits, as if he were timing our interaction and looking for excuses to leave. When Jamie played with the simple toys I kept at my house, building blocks, picture books, a stuffed animal, David would make subtle comments about how different these were from the educational toys Jamie was used to at home and at the Ashfords house. Jamie's getting really advanced with his interactive learning tablets, David mentioned during one visit, watching his son stack wooden blocks with obvious enjoyment. The Ashfords bought him this amazing system that teaches language skills and mathematical concepts. It's pretty sophisticated stuff. The implication was clear. My old-fashioned toys were fine for brief visits, but they weren't contributing to Jamie's development the way the expensive educational equipment at the Ashford house did. Even my time with my grandson was being evaluated and found lacking. The pattern became more obvious during holiday seasons. Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, 4th of July, every major holiday followed the same script. The Ashfords would host elaborate celebrations with extended family and friends. David, Penelope, and Jamie would attend these gatherings, often traveling to the Ashfords' vacation homes or exclusive venues. I would receive a brief visit either before or after the main celebration, usually lasting no more than an hour or two. "We can't stay long," became David's standard greeting when he arrived for these obligatory visits. "Penelope's family is expecting us at the country club by 3, or we need to get Jamie home for his nap before dinner at Eleanor's tonight." I began to feel like a checkbox on a holiday to-do list. Visit Mom, check. Now on to the real celebration. The most painful realization came during Jamie's 3rd birthday, when I discovered through a chance encounter at the grocery store that there had been 2 birthday parties. Margaret Hayes, who worked at the upscale bakery downtown, mentioned seeing the beautiful cake she had delivered to the Ashford estate for Jamie's party. "That was quite an event," she said as we stood in the checkout line. "Must have been 50 people there, maybe more. The cake alone cost more than most people spend on an entire party." I felt the blood drain from my face. I thought Jamie's birthday was last weekend at David and Penelope's house. Margaret looked confused. "Oh, there might have been 2 parties. The one I delivered to was definitely this past Saturday. Beautiful setup. They had a circus theme with real performers and everything." There had been 2 parties. A small, modest gathering for my benefit, and a lavish celebration with the people who actually mattered to David and Penelope. I had been given the consolation party, the token gesture designed to make me feel included while ensuring I didn't interfere with the real celebration. When I confronted David about this as gently as possible, not wanting to seem demanding or difficult, his response was a masterclass in gaslighting wrapped in concern for my feelings. "Mom, I didn't want you to feel overwhelmed," he explained, his voice taking on that patient tone people use with elderly relatives who don't quite understand modern life. "The Ashford party was really formal and intense. Lots of business associates and their families, very structured activities, not really your kind of thing. I thought you'd be more comfortable with something smaller and more intimate." "But it's Jamie's birthday," I said quietly. I would have liked the chance to decide for myself whether I was comfortable. "Of course," David said quickly. "You're absolutely right. Next time I'll make sure to include you in all the planning from the beginning."
But there was no next time. The pattern of dual celebrations continued for every major milestone, with me consistently relegated to the smaller, less significant gathering, while the Ashfords hosted the main events that would be photographed, remembered, and talked about for years to come. The breaking point in my growing awareness came during a conversation I overheard by accident when David and Penelope brought Jamie for one of their brief visits. I had gone to the kitchen to prepare snacks when I heard Penelope talking on her phone in the living room, apparently to her mother. "No, we're just at David's mother's house for a quick visit," she was saying, her voice carrying that particular tone of someone explaining a necessary but unpleasant obligation. "We'll be done here in about 30 minutes, then we can head over to the club." Yes, it's always a bit awkward, but David feels guilty if we don't check in with her regularly. I know, but what can you do? She raised him, so he feels obligated. Obligated. That single word crystallized everything I had been trying not to acknowledge. I wasn't David's beloved mother who had sacrificed everything for his success. I wasn't the grandmother who deserved a meaningful relationship with her grandson. I wasn't even a person David genuinely wanted to spend time with. I was an obligation, a duty to be fulfilled as efficiently as possible so he could move on to the relationships and activities that actually mattered to him. I stood in my kitchen, holding a plate of cookies I had spent the morning baking for my grandson's visit, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. The hurt was still there, sharp and familiar, but it was joined by something else: anger. Clean, clarifying anger at being reduced to an item on David's guilt management checklist. For 38 years, I had been making excuses for my son's behavior, rationalizing his choices, adapting my expectations to accommodate his changing priorities. I had convinced myself that his distance was natural, that his new life simply required different kinds of relationships, that my feelings of exclusion were selfish and small-minded. But standing in that kitchen, listening to my daughter-in-law describe time with me as an awkward obligation that had to be endured rather than enjoyed, I finally admitted the truth I had been avoiding. My son was ashamed of me. Ashamed of where he came from, ashamed of my modest lifestyle, ashamed of the woman who had worked multiple jobs to give him the foundation for his current success. The David I had raised, the boy who had promised to take care of me the way I had taken care of him, no longer existed. In his place was a man who saw me as a liability to be managed, rather than a person to be loved. That realization should have broken me completely. Instead, it began the process of setting me free. Because once you stop making excuses for people's behavior, once you stop accepting crumbs and calling them a feast, once you acknowledge that you deserve better treatment than you're receiving, you can finally start making the changes necessary to protect your own dignity and self-worth. I didn't know it yet, but that overheard phone conversation was preparing me for the shocking discovery that would soon reveal just how little I actually knew about David's life and the family that had so completely replaced me in his affections. The crisis that forced everything into the open came at the worst possible time, during what should have been a moment of pure joy. Jamie had just turned 4, and David called me on a Tuesday evening with news that made my heart soar. "Mom, you're not going to believe this," he said, and for the first time in months I heard genuine excitement in his voice rather than the polite distance that had become our norm. Jamie got accepted to Prestwick Academy's early childhood program. He'll be starting in the fall. Prestwick Academy. Even I knew what that meant. It was the most exclusive private school in the region, the kind of institution that had waiting lists stretching back years and tuition that cost more than many people's annual salaries. Getting accepted there, especially at such a young age, was extraordinary. "Oh, David, that's incredible news," I said, tears of pride welling up in my eyes. "My brilliant grandson. I'm so proud of him and of you and Penelope for giving him such amazing opportunities." The Ashfords are over the moon. Mr. Ashford went to Prestwick, and his father before him. It's like a family tradition continuing. They're planning this huge celebration dinner this Saturday at the Grandview Country Club to announce Jamie's acceptance to all their friends and family. My heart swelled with anticipation. A celebration for my grandson, surrounded by family, marking this incredible achievement. What time should I be there? Should I bring anything special? The silence on the other end of the line stretched just long enough for my excitement to begin curdling into dread.
"Oh, Mom," David said finally, his voice shifting into that carefully controlled tone I had learned to recognize as the precursor to disappointment. "I should have been clearer. This is really an Ashford family tradition, you know? The whole alumni network thing, the legacy connections. It's pretty formal, and Penelope's parents have already made all the arrangements." I felt the familiar sting of exclusion, but this time something inside me refused to accept it quietly. "David, this is my grandson we're talking about. This is one of the most important moments in his young life. Of course I want to be there to celebrate with him." I know, David said quickly, clearly uncomfortable with my directness. "And we absolutely want to celebrate with you too. Maybe we could plan something separate, just the four of us. Somewhere more comfortable and casual where we can really focus on Jamie." The words hit me like a physical blow. Something separate? Something smaller? Something that wouldn't interfere with the real celebration happening with the people who actually mattered? "Are you saying I'm not welcome at my own grandson's celebration because it might be uncomfortable for the Ashfords?" I asked, my voice sharper than I had intended. "That's not— Mom, please, don't make this more complicated than it needs to be," David said, his tone becoming defensive. "This is about Jamie, not about us. The Ashfords have connections at Prestwick going back generations. This dinner is as much about networking and maintaining relationships as it is about celebrating Jamie's acceptance." "And what am I in this scenario?" I asked, the anger that had been building for months finally finding its voice. "What relationship am I supposed to maintain? What network do I belong to?" "You're his grandmother," he said, as if that should be enough. "That's important too, just in a different way." "Different how?" I pressed, no longer caring if I sounded difficult or demanding. "Different because I didn't go to the right schools? Different because I don't have country club connections? Different because I'm not rich enough to matter?" "Mom, you're being unfair," David said, his voice taking on an edge of irritation. "This isn't about money or social status. This is about what makes sense for Jamie's future. The Ashfords understand this world in a way that I don't," I finished for him. "Is that what you were going to say? That I don't understand this world?" The silence stretched between us, heavy with truths neither of us wanted to speak directly. "I think you're overreacting," David said finally. "We can have our own celebration that's more meaningful anyway. Just family, without all the political stuff." But I was done accepting consolation prizes, done being relegated to the just family category, while the Ashfords got the real celebration designation. "No," I said quietly, "I won't be having a separate celebration. If I'm not welcome at the actual celebration for my grandson's achievement, then there won't be a need for any celebration between us at all." "Mom, come on, don't be like this," David said, his voice carrying a pleading note I hadn't heard in years. "You're being dramatic. It's just one dinner." "It's not just one dinner, David," I said, feeling a strange calm settle on me, despite the tears streaming down my face. "It's 3 years of being treated like an inconvenience in my own family. It's watching my grandson grow up from the sidelines while other people get to be central to his life. It's being told repeatedly that I don't fit in, that I'm not appropriate, that I make things complicated." "That's not— Mom," protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it?
When was the last time you invited me to anything without it being a separate, smaller version of something the Ashfords were hosting? When was the last time you included me in a decision about Jamie without checking with Penelope's parents first? When was the last time you treated me like I mattered as much as they do? The questions hung in the air between us, unanswered because we both knew what the answers were. I think you're being unfair to Penelope and her family. They've been nothing but generous to us, to Jamie. They've opened doors and created opportunities that I never could. Yes, David, I understand that. I understand that they can give you things I never could. But I gave you things they never could too. I gave you love without conditions. I gave you support without expecting anything in return. I gave you every opportunity I could afford and some I couldn't. And I appreciate that, David said. But it sounded like something he was supposed to say rather than something he felt. Do you? I asked. Because it feels like you see those sacrifices as something you had to overcome rather than something you benefited from. It feels like you're embarrassed by the woman who raised you.
That's not, David started, then stopped. Mom, I don't know what you want me to say. I want you to tell me the truth, I said. I want you to admit that you've chosen your wife's family over your own mother. I want you to acknowledge that you're ashamed of where you came from. I want you to stop pretending that excluding me from important family events is somehow for my own good. The silence that followed was deafening. In that pause, I heard everything David couldn't bring himself to say. That he was embarrassed by my small house, my modest income, my lack of social connections. That he saw me as a liability rather than an asset. That his new life had no room for the woman who had made it possible. I think, David said finally, his voice carefully controlled, that you're upset and not thinking clearly. Maybe we should talk about this when you've had time to calm down. And there it was, the final insult. After being excluded from yet another important family milestone, after expressing legitimate hurt and frustration, I was being dismissed as emotional and irrational. I am thinking clearly, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Probably more clearly than I have in years. And what I'm thinking is that if I'm not family enough to celebrate my grandson's achievements, then maybe I'm not family enough to continue pretending that this relationship is working. What does that mean? David asked, and I heard the first note of genuine concern in his voice. It means I'm done accepting scraps and calling them a feast. It means I'm done making excuses for behavior that would be unacceptable from a stranger, let alone from my own son. It means I'm done prioritizing a relationship with someone who clearly sees me as an obligation rather than as someone worth loving. Mom, you're being dramatic, David said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. You don't mean that. I've never meant anything more in my life, I replied. Enjoy your celebration on Saturday, David. I hope it's everything you and the Ashfords want it to be. I hung up before he could respond, and for the first time in months, I felt something other than hurt or anger. I felt relief. The truth was finally in the open, and while it was painful, it was also liberating. I had no idea that within 48 hours, I would receive a phone call that would reveal secrets about the Ashford family that would turn David's world completely upside down and force him to confront truths he had been desperately trying to avoid. The 48 hours following my confrontation with David were strange and liberating in equal measure. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking on eggshells, wondering what I should or shouldn't say to avoid making my own son uncomfortable. I wasn't planning my life around brief, grudging visits or secondary celebrations designed to keep me satisfied while excluding me from what really mattered. Instead, I felt an unexpected sense of peace. The truth was finally in the open, painful as it was. I had stopped pretending that a relationship built on obligation and managed from a distance was somehow normal or acceptable. I had chosen my own dignity over the desperate hope that David might someday remember how to love me the way I had always loved him. That Friday evening, as I sat in my quiet house reading a book I had been meaning to get to for months, my phone rang.
The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something compelled me to answer. Catherine Winters? The voice was professional, businesslike, but warm. Yes, this is Catherine. Ms. Winters, my name is Rebecca Martinez. I'm a real estate attorney here in Grandview. I represent the Ashford Family Trust, and I'm calling because we have a situation that requires your immediate attention. My heart skipped a beat. Had something happened to David? To Jamie? Despite everything that had transpired between us, the thought of either of them being hurt sent panic shooting through me. What kind of situation? I asked, gripping the phone tighter. It's regarding the property at 847 Willowbrook Heights Drive. I understand your son and daughter-in-law currently reside there? I felt confusion rather than relief. Yes, that's David and Penelope's house, but I don't understand why you're calling me about it. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Ms. Winters, are you not aware that you're listed as the primary beneficiary and trustee of that property? The words made no sense. I'm sorry, what? There must be a mistake. That house belongs to my son and his wife. They bought it several years ago. Ma'am, I think we need to meet in person to discuss the situation. There are some documents you need to see and some decisions that need to be made. Would you be available to come to my office tomorrow morning?
I spent a sleepless night trying to make sense of Rebecca Martinez's phone call. How could I possibly be connected to David and Penelope's house? I had never been involved in their real estate transactions, had never signed any documents related to their property. There had to be some administrative error, some confusion with names or addresses. But deep in my chest, a strange feeling was growing. Not quite hope, but something close to anticipation. After years of being told I didn't understand David's world, of being excluded from important information about my own family, maybe I was about to learn something that would finally make sense of the puzzle pieces that had never quite fit together. Rebecca Martinez's office was located in downtown Grandview, in one of those sleek glass buildings that housed the law firms and financial institutions serving the area's wealthiest families. As I sat in the elegant waiting room, surrounded by expensive furniture and original artwork, I felt the familiar sense of not belonging that had become so common whenever I ventured into David's new world. Rebecca herself was a woman in her 40s, impeccably dressed, but with kind eyes that immediately put me at ease. She led me into her office and gestured for me to sit across from her desk. Miss Winters, before we begin, I need to ask you a question. Have you ever heard the name Harrison Blackwell? I searched my memory, but came up empty. No, I don't think so. Should I have? Rebecca nodded, as if this was the answer she had expected. Harrison Blackwell was your maternal grandfather. He died when you were very young, probably too young to remember him clearly. I felt a faint stirring of recognition. My mother had mentioned her father occasionally when I was growing up, but always with a sadness that discouraged further questions. I knew he had died when my mother was still young, leaving her to be raised by relatives, but the details had always been vague. What does my grandfather have to do with David's house? I asked. Rebecca opened a thick file folder and pulled out several documents. Harrison Blackwell was a very successful businessman in his time. He owned considerable real estate throughout this region, including the land that would eventually become Willowbrook Heights. When he died, he left everything in trust for his descendants, with very specific instructions about how the inheritance should be managed. She handed me a document that looked old and official. According to the terms of the trust, the primary beneficiary is always the eldest living direct descendant in each generation. When your mother died 15 years ago, that designation passed to you. I stared at the document, trying to process what she was telling me. Are you saying I inherited property from a grandfather I never knew? Not just property, she said gently. Miss Winters, you inherited the entire Willowbrook Heights development. Every house, every lot, every commercial space in that area. The trust has been managed by the Ashford family's firm for 30 decades, but you are the actual owner.
The room seemed to tilt around me. That's impossible. The Ashfords are one of the wealthiest families in Grandview. They own half the real estate in the area. Rebecca's expression was carefully neutral. The Ashfords manage considerable real estate holdings, including your trust. But the Willowbrook Heights properties belong to you. The house your son lives in, the one he believes he purchased, he's been paying rent to your trust for the past 4 years. Rent? The word came out as barely a whisper. The Ashfords have been managing this arrangement through a complex series of shell companies and management firms. To your son and daughter-in-law, it appears they're paying a mortgage to a traditional lender. In reality, those payments have been going into your trust account, which has been managed by the Ashford family firm. I felt sick. Are you telling me that my son doesn't actually own his house? That he's been renting from me without knowing it? That's exactly what I am telling you. And, Miss Winters, there's more. The trust terms require that the primary beneficiary be informed of their inheritance and given control of the assets by their 60th birthday. You turned 62 last year. But I never knew. No one ever told me. Rebecca's expression darkened slightly. According to our records, multiple attempts were made to contact you through the Ashford firm. Letters were sent to your address, but they were apparently returned as undeliverable. Phone calls were made to numbers that were reportedly disconnected. A cold realization was beginning to creep over me. The Ashfords were supposed to inform me? They were the trustees responsible for locating you and transferring control of the assets. It appears there may have been some irregularities in how they handled that responsibility. Irregularities? Rebecca chose her words carefully. It's possible that the Ashfords had personal incentives to delay informing you of your inheritance. The management fees they've been collecting on your trust are substantial, several $100,000 per year. Additionally, having your son as what he believed was a homeowner in their managed community gave them leverage in their business relationship with him.
The pieces were finally clicking into place with horrible clarity. David's rapid promotion at the Ashford firm, his quick acceptance into Grandview's social circles, the way the Ashfords had so readily welcomed him into their family and their business. They had known all along that he was the son of the woman who actually owned the property they were managing. They had cultivated his dependency on them, encouraged his sense of gratitude and obligation, all while keeping the truth from both of us. "How much money are we talking about?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Rebecca consulted another document. The trust is currently valued at approximately $48 million. The annual income from rents and investments is roughly $4.2 million. After management fees and expenses, the net annual income is about $3.8 million. I felt the blood drain from my face. Nearly $4 million per year. While I had been working extra shifts as a paralegal, pinching pennies to buy Christmas gifts for my grandson, I had been one of the wealthiest women in the region without knowing it. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "That depends on what you want to happen," Rebecca said. "You have several options. You can assume direct control of the trust and its assets immediately. You can continue with the current management arrangement but demand proper disclosure and accounting. Or you can liquidate the entire trust and take direct ownership of the assets." "What about David? What about their house?" Rebecca's expression was sympathetic but firm. "That will depend on what you decide to do. As the property owner, you have the right to continue the current rental arrangement, modify the terms, or terminate it entirely. Your son and daughter-in-law would need to be informed of the true nature of their housing situation." I sat in that office for nearly 2 hours, reading documents, asking questions, and trying to comprehend the magnitude of what I had learned. By the time I left, I had signed papers transferring immediate control of the trust to myself and requesting a complete audit of the Ashford firm's management practices over the past 3 decades. But more importantly, I had made a decision about what to do with the information that would change David's life forever. That evening, I sat in my small house on Elm Street, the house I now realized I could replace with a mansion 10 times larger if I chose, and picked up my phone to call my son. It was time for David to learn some truths about his perfect new family and the real source of the wealth and status he had been so eager to embrace. I didn't call David that night. As much as part of me wanted to pick up the phone immediately and shatter his illusions about the Ashford family, I realized I needed time to process everything I had learned and decide how to handle the most important conversation of our relationship. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I put myself first. I poured a glass of wine, ordered Chinese takeout from my favorite restaurant, and sat in my living room trying to absorb the reality that my entire life had fundamentally changed in the space of a single afternoon. I was wealthy. Not just comfortable, not just secure, but genuinely wealthy in a way that would eliminate every financial worry I had ever had and provide opportunities I had never dared to imagine. The woman the Ashfords had dismissed as too unsophisticated for their social circles, the mother my own son had been embarrassed to include in important family events, owned more property in Grandview than any single family, except possibly the original founding families. But more than the money, what struck me was the betrayal. Not just from the Ashfords, who had been legally obligated to inform me of my inheritance and had clearly chosen not to, but from David. Because as I sat there thinking through everything Rebecca Martinez had told me, I realized there was no way David could have been completely unaware of the situation. His rapid promotion at Ashford and Associates, his instant acceptance into Grandview's most exclusive circles, the way Mr. Ashford had taken such personal interest in his career, none of it made sense unless there had been some underlying connection the Ashfords knew about but hadn't shared with David. They had cultivated him not because he was an exceptional talent, but because he was the son of the woman who owned the crown jewel of their real estate management portfolio. The question was, how much did David know and when did he know it?
The trust documents were meticulously specific. The assets were to be held in trust for his direct descendants, with the eldest child in each generation becoming the primary beneficiary upon reaching age 60. The trust was to be managed by a reputable firm, with the beneficiary to be located and informed no later than their 60th birthday, at which point they would assume full control. Every aspect of my situation had been clearly anticipated and legally documented. There was no ambiguity, no room for misinterpretation. The Ashfords had known exactly what they were supposed to do, and they had chosen not to do it. On Monday morning, I did something that would have been unthinkable just a week earlier. I called in sick to work. For the first time in my career, I used a personal day not because I was genuinely ill or because of a family emergency, but because I had more important things to do than fulfill my obligations to other people. I drove to Grandview and spent the day exploring the Willowbrook Heights neighborhood that I now knew belonged to me. I had been there many times before to visit David and Penelope, but I had always felt like an intruder, someone who didn't belong in such an expensive area. Now I walked those streets with a completely different perspective. The houses were beautiful, certainly, but they were also just houses. The people walking their dogs or tending their gardens were just people, no more or less valuable than the residents of any other neighborhood. The mystique that had always surrounded this area in my mind, the sense that it represented a level of success and sophistication I could never achieve, evaporated as I realized I had actually owned it all along. I parked across the street from David and Penelope's house and sat in my car, looking at the place my son called home. It was lovely, undeniably, with its perfectly manicured lawn and elegant architecture, but it was also cold somehow, impersonal in a way that my small house on Elm Street had never been. There were no toys visible in the yard, no signs of the kind of casual family life that had characterized David's childhood. Everything was perfect, controlled, designed for appearance rather than comfort. It occurred to me that this house was a perfect metaphor for what David's life had become, beautiful on the surface, but lacking the warmth and authenticity that had once defined him. As I sat there, I saw a familiar figure emerge from the house next door, Eleanor Ashford, carrying a designer handbag and walking with the purposeful stride of someone with important places to be. She glanced in my direction but didn't recognize me. Or if she did, she chose not to acknowledge my presence. This woman, who had treated me with barely concealed condescension for years, who had made it clear that I was not welcome in her social circles, who had spoken about me as if I were an embarrassing obligation her son-in-law had to manage, this woman had been living off the income from my property while deliberately keeping me in ignorance about my own inheritance. The audacity was breathtaking. But more than that, it was illuminating. The Ashfords' behavior toward me suddenly made perfect sense. They hadn't dismissed me because I was inferior or unworthy. They had dismissed me because they were terrified I might discover the truth about my financial situation and demand accountability for their management of my assets. Every slight, every exclusion, every moment they had made me feel small and insignificant had been part of a calculated strategy to keep me marginalized and uninformed. They had weaponized my son's social ambitions against me, encouraging his embarrassment about his humble origins to ensure he would never ask too many questions about how his new life had become possible so quickly. That afternoon, I made a series of phone calls that began the process of taking control not just of my inheritance, but of my entire life. I contacted a financial advisor who specialized in high net worth clients. I spoke with a tax attorney about the implications of my changed financial status. I even called a real estate agent about properties in different parts of the country, places where I could start fresh without the baggage of my current relationships and social dynamics. For the first time in my adult life, I had choices. Real choices. I could live anywhere I wanted, do anything I wanted, be anyone I wanted to be. The limitations that had defined my existence, the need to work full-time to pay my bills, the inability to travel or pursue expensive hobbies, the constant worry about financial security and retirement, all of those constraints had vanished overnight. But the most important choice I faced was what to do about David and our relationship. I had the power now to expose the Ashfords' deception, to reveal to my son that his perfect new life had been built on a foundation of lies and betrayal. I could force him to confront the truth about the family he had chosen over his own mother. The question was whether doing so would bring us closer together or drive us permanently apart.
By Tuesday evening, I had made my decision. I would call David and ask him to meet me for dinner. Just the two of us, without Penelope or the Ashfords or any of the other people who had been mediating our relationship for years. I would tell him everything I had learned, and I would give him the chance to explain his role in the deception. But more than that, I would give him the opportunity to choose his relationship with me, built on honesty and mutual respect, or his relationship with the Ashfords, built on lies and manipulation. What happened next would determine not just the future of our family, but whether the love I had always believed existed between us was strong enough to survive the truth. I picked up my phone and dialed his number, my heart pounding as I prepared to change both our lives forever. When David answered my call, I could hear the surprise in his voice. We hadn't spoken since our confrontation about Janie's celebration 3 days earlier, and I suspected he had been hoping our argument would simply blow over with time, the way our disagreements always had in the past. "Mom?" he said, his tone cautious but not entirely unfriendly. "I wasn't expecting to hear from you so soon." "David, I need to see you," I said, cutting straight to the point. "Tonight, if possible. Just you and me. There's something we need to discuss." There was a pause. "Is everything okay? You sound different." I almost laughed at that. Different didn't begin to cover the magnitude of the changes that had occurred in my life over the past few days. "I'm fine, but yes, things are different, very different. Can you meet me at Romano's at 7, the same booth where we used to celebrate your achievements?" Another pause. "Mom, if this is about Saturday's celebration, I really think you're overreacting. Maybe we should wait until you've had more time to—" "This isn't about Saturday," I interrupted. "This is about something much more important.
David, I'm asking you to trust me enough to give me 2 hours of your time. Can you do that? The urgency in my voice must have gotten to him because he agreed. Okay, yes, I'll be there at 7, but Mom, I hope you're not planning to make demands about Jamie's celebration because that situation really is complicated and just be there, David, please. I arrived at Romano's 15 minutes early and asked for the corner booth where David and I had shared so many meaningful conversations over the years. The restaurant looked exactly the same as it had when we celebrated his high school graduation, his college acceptance, his first job, but I felt like a completely different person sitting there waiting for a conversation that would either restore our relationship or end it forever. David walked in precisely at 7, looking around the familiar restaurant with an expression I couldn't quite read. When he spotted me, he made his way over with the careful movements of someone approaching a potentially explosive situation. "Hi, Mom," he said, sliding into the booth across from me. "This place brings back memories." "Good memories. At least, I hope they were good for you, too." He nodded, studying my face with obvious concern. "You really do seem different. Are you sure you're okay?" "I'm more okay than I've been in years," I said honestly. "But I need to tell you something that's going to be difficult to hear, and I need to ask you some questions that might be difficult to answer." David's expression shifted from concern to wariness. "What kind of questions?" I had rehearsed this conversation a dozen times in my head, but sitting there looking at my son, really looking at him for the first time in months, I realized that no amount of preparation could make this easy. I decided to start with the simplest facts and work my way up to the more complex implications. "David, do you know who Harrison Blackwell was?" His reaction was immediate and telling. His face went pale, and he gripped his water glass so tightly I was afraid it might shatter. "Where did you hear that name?" "So you do know who he was?" David looked around the restaurant as if checking to see who might be listening to our conversation. "Mom, how do you know about Harrison Blackwell?" He was my grandfather, my mother's father. Did you know that?" The silence that followed stretched for nearly a full minute. David's face cycled through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, fear, and finally something that looked like resignation. "How long have you known?" he asked finally. "I found out 3 days ago," I said. "But that's not what I asked you. I asked you if you knew Harrison Blackwell was my grandfather." David closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them, I saw something I hadn't seen in years: the vulnerable, frightened boy he had been when his father abandoned us. "I've known for about 2 years," he admitted. "Mr. Ashford told me when he promoted me to senior advisor."
The admission hit me like a physical blow, even though I had suspected as much. My own son had known about my inheritance for 2 years and had said nothing. Had actively participated in keeping me in ignorance while benefiting from the deception. "Tell me everything," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "From the beginning." David took a shaky breath. "When I started working at Ashford and Associates, I thought it was just because of my qualifications and Penelope's recommendation. But after about a year, Mr. Ashford started giving me responsibilities that were way above my experience level. Bigger clients, more complex portfolios. I thought I was just proving myself, but it didn't make sense how fast everything was happening." He paused, clearly struggling with what to say next. "Go on," I prompted. "About 2 years ago, Mr. Ashford called me into his office for what I thought was a routine performance review. Instead, he told me about the Blackwell Trust. He said they had been trying to locate the primary beneficiary for years, following up on leads that never panned out. Then one day, he was reviewing my employment file and noticed my mother's maiden name was Blackwell." I felt sick. "So they investigated my background." "They hired a genealogist," David confirmed. "When they confirmed you were Harrison Blackwell's granddaughter, Mr. Ashford said it explained why I had such good instincts for real estate investment.
He said it was in my blood. And you believed that? David's face flushed. I wanted to believe it. Mom, do you have any idea what it felt like to finally have an explanation for why I was succeeding so quickly? To feel like I belonged in that world instead of just pretending to fit in? So, you decided not to tell me. Mr. Ashford said it was complicated, David said quickly. He said there were legal issues with the trust, tax implications, that it might take years to sort out. He said it would be better to wait until everything was resolved before getting your hopes up. I stared at my son, seeing clearly for the first time the weak, self-serving man he had become. And you believed that too? I wanted to believe it, he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. What about the house, David? When did you find out you weren't actually buying the house? His face crumpled. About 6 months ago, Penelope found some documents that didn't make sense. Papers that looked like lease agreements instead of mortgage documents. When she confronted her father, he told us the truth about the rental arrangement. And still you said nothing to me? By then, everything was so complicated, David said desperately. We had Jamie to think about, his school, our friends, our whole life in that neighborhood. Mr. Ashford said you were better off not knowing, that the money was being managed responsibly and would be there for you when you needed it. When I needed it? I repeated incredulously. David, I'd been working full-time as a paralegal while sitting on a $48 million inheritance. When exactly was I supposed to need it more than I needed it every day for the past 2 years? The number seemed to hit David like a physical blow. 48 million? I thought it was maybe 5 or 10 million. I laughed bitterly. You thought it was only 5 or 10 million, so that made it okay to keep it from me? No, that's not what I meant. What did you mean, David? I asked, leaning forward. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you found out your mother was wealthy, and instead of telling her, you decided to keep the information secret so you could continue benefiting from a situation that kept me in ignorance and the Ashfords in control? That's not fair, David protested. I was trying to protect you. Protect me from what? From having financial security? From being able to retire comfortably? From having choices about how to live my life? From having to deal with all the complications that come with that kind of money? You don't understand how complex these situations can be, how many people would suddenly want to take advantage of you. I stared at him in amazement. David, people were already taking advantage of me. Your in-laws were collecting hundreds of thousands of dollars in management fees on my money while keeping me completely in the dark about my own inheritance. You were living in a house I owned while treating me like an embarrassment who didn't belong in your neighborhood? How exactly were you protecting me from being taken advantage of? The question hung in the air between us, unanswered because we both knew there was no good answer. David had not been protecting me, he had been protecting himself and the Ashfords from the consequences of their deception. I know how this looks, David said finally, but I never meant for it to go on this long. I kept thinking I would find the right time to tell you, the right way to explain everything. When? When would have been the right time? After Jamie graduated from high school? After I died and you inherited everything without me ever knowing I had it?
Mom, please, David said, tears starting to form in his eyes. I know I made mistakes, but I never wanted to hurt you. I love you. I looked at my son, this man I had raised, sacrificed for, loved unconditionally for 38 years, and felt a profound sadness settle over me. Not just for our relationship, but for the person he had allowed himself to become. David, I said softly, I need you to understand something. This isn't about the money. This is about trust, about honesty, about treating me with basic respect and dignity. For 2 years, you have allowed me to be deceived about my own financial situation while you benefited from that deception. You have watched me worry about retirement, seen me work extra hours to make ends meet, and you said nothing.
"I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry, Mom." "I know you are," I said, "but sorry isn't enough anymore. The question now is what you're going to do to make this right." David's question hung in the air between us like a challenge and a plea rolled into one. "What do you want me to do, Mom? How can I make this right?" I had been thinking about this moment for days, knowing that everything would come down to this choice point. The old Catherine would have made it easy for him, would have found a way to minimize his betrayal and focus on rebuilding our relationship as quickly as possible, but that woman no longer existed. "I want you to choose," I said simply, "right here, right now. I want you to choose between the life you've built on lies and the relationship you could have with me based on truth." David's face went pale. "What do you mean?" "I mean I'm taking control of my inheritance, David. All of it. I'm terminating the Ashfords' management of the trust, I'm demanding a full audit of their practices over the past 30 years, and I'm holding them accountable for every dollar they've collected while keeping me in ignorance." His hands were shaking now. "What about the house? What about Jamie's school?" "That depends entirely on you," I said, reaching across the table to take his hands in mine. "If you choose to rebuild our relationship based on honesty and mutual respect, we'll figure out the practical details together. If you choose to stay loyal to the people who orchestrated this deception, then you'll have to figure out those details without me." "Mom, please, you can't just—" "I can," I said, gently but firmly. "David, for the first time in my adult life, I have real choices. I can live anywhere I want, do anything I want, support any causes I believe in. I can travel. I can pursue interests I've never had time for. I can build relationships with people who value me for who I am rather than what I can provide." I squeezed his hands. "But more than anything else, I can choose to surround myself only with people who treat me with love and respect. The question is whether you want to be one of those people." The silence stretched between us as David processed the magnitude of what I was offering and what I was asking in return. Finally, he looked up at me with tears streaming down his face. "I choose you, Mom. I choose our relationship. I choose the truth." What happened next was the most difficult and the most liberating period of both our lives. David kept his word, but the process of rebuilding trust and redefining our relationship was neither quick nor easy. The first step was confronting the Ashfords together. When David called Mr. Ashford to request a meeting, citing urgent family business, I could hear the panic in Penelope's father's voice even from across the room. They knew their carefully constructed deception was finally crumbling. The meeting took place in Rebecca Martinez's office, with both our attorneys present. Mr. Ashford tried to maintain his composure, but Eleanor Ashford was visibly shaken from the moment we walked in together. "I think there's been some misunderstanding," Mr. Ashford began, but Rebecca cut him off immediately. "The only misunderstanding was your failure to inform Ms. Winters of her inheritance as required by law. We're here to discuss the terms of your resignation as trustees and the return of improperly collected management fees." The legal proceedings took months to resolve, but in the end, the Ashfords were forced to return nearly $2 million in excessive management fees and faced a formal censure from the State Bar Association. More importantly, for David, he finally understood the true nature of the family he had been so eager to join. Penelope's reaction to the revelations was perhaps the most telling of all. When David told her that evening about our conversation and his decision to support me in reclaiming my inheritance, her response was immediate and devastating. "You're going to ruin everything we've built. Do you have any idea what this means for our social standing, for Jamie's future, for my family's reputation?" Not once did she express concern for the injustice that had been done to me or show any remorse for her family's role in the deception. Her only worry was how the truth might affect her own comfort and status.
David filed for divorce 6 months later. The custody arrangement for Jamie was complicated, but it was also liberating for both David and our grandson.
For the first time, Jamie got to experience a childhood that wasn't orchestrated by Eleanor Ashford's rigid expectations. David moved into a smaller but warmer house just 3 blocks from my place on Elm Street, and Jamie began spending every other weekend with us, building the authentic relationship I had been denied for the first 4 years of his life. Watching David rediscover his identity outside the Ashford sphere of influence was like watching someone emerge from a long illness. He left Ashford and Associates and started his own investment advisory firm, specializing in helping middle-class families build wealth, the kind of work that actually mattered to him rather than simply generating commissions and status. "I forgot who I was," he told me one evening as we watched Jamie play in my backyard. "I got so caught up in trying to become someone else that I lost sight of the person you raised me to be." "You didn't lose him," I said. "You just buried him under other people's expectations." But he was always there, waiting to come back. As for me, the past 2 years have been a revelation. I retired from my job as a paralegal, but instead of retreating into a quiet retirement, I threw myself into philanthropy and advocacy work. I established a foundation that provides college scholarships to single mothers and their children, focusing on families who might otherwise never have access to higher education. I bought a beautiful house with a garden that backs up to a lake, where Jamie and I spend hours fishing and talking about everything and nothing. I traveled to places I had only read about: Ireland to explore my heritage, Italy to see the art I had studied in books, Alaska to experience wilderness I had never imagined. But perhaps most importantly, I learned to value myself the way I had always valued others. I surrounded myself with friends who celebrated my successes rather than minimizing them, who included me in their lives because they enjoyed my company rather than because they felt obligated to tolerate my presence. Helen Morrison, my neighbor from Elm Street, became one of my closest friends. We travel together now, 2 independent women exploring the world with the freedom that comes from no longer having to define ourselves through other people's needs and expectations. "You know what I admire most about your story?" Helen said to me recently as we sat on my new deck watching the sunset over the lake. "It's not that you got your money back or that you stood up to the people who wronged you. It's that you finally learned to put yourself on your own priority list." 6 months ago, David asked me to walk him down the aisle at his wedding to Sarah Collins, a kind, unpretentious woman who works as a teacher at Jamie's school. She had never heard of the Ashfords when they met, and she couldn't care less about David's previous life in Grandview social circles. She loves him for who he is now, not for what he can provide or what connections he can offer. The wedding was small and intimate, held in the garden of my new house with only the people who truly mattered to all of us in attendance. As I walked my son down the aisle to meet the woman who loved him authentically, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced since he was a child. "Thank you," David whispered to me just before we reached Sarah, "for not giving up on me, for showing me what real love looks like." "You never lost my love," I whispered back. "You just forgot how to recognize it." Jamie, now 6 years old and thriving in public school, gave a toast at the reception that brought tears to everyone's eyes. "I'm glad my daddy found someone who makes him laugh like Grandma Catherine does," he said solemnly. "And I'm glad Grandma Catherine found out she was rich because now she can buy me really cool birthday presents and take me on adventures." Everyone laughed, but Jamie's innocent words captured something profound. The best things that had come from discovering my inheritance weren't the material possessions or financial security, though those were certainly welcome. The best things were the relationships built on truth, the freedom to be authentic, and the knowledge that I was worth loving exactly as I was. Last week, I received a wedding invitation that made me smile. Eleanor Ashford's youngest daughter was getting married, and apparently my name was on the guest list. The woman who had once dismissed me as too unsophisticated for her social circles was now eager to include me in her family celebrations. I sent my regrets with a beautiful crystal vase and a note expressing my best wishes for the happy couple. I had no interest in revenge or in making the Ashfords uncomfortable, but I also had no interest in pretending that people who had betrayed my trust were suddenly my friends.
These days, my time is too precious and my relationships too authentic to waste on anyone who doesn't genuinely value my presence in their lives. As I sit here in my garden this evening, watching Jamie chase fireflies while David and Sarah plan their first vacation as a family, I'm struck by how completely my life has transformed. Not just because of the money, though financial security certainly makes everything easier, but because I finally learned to demand the respect and love I had always deserved. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the courage to stop accepting less than we're worth. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is set boundaries that force the people in our lives to treat us with dignity. And sometimes the family that truly matters isn't the one you're born into or even the one you create, but the one you choose when you finally understand your own value. My son chose his wife's family over mine for several years, but in the end, he chose something even more important. He chose truth over lies, authenticity over appearance, and love over status. And I chose myself. If you've stayed with me through this entire journey, thank you for listening to what I know was a difficult story about family, betrayal, and ultimately redemption. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt marginalized by the people who should love you most, remember this: you are worth more than the scraps of attention and affection that others might be willing to offer you. You deserve to be celebrated, not tolerated. You deserve to be included, not managed. You deserve relationships built on mutual respect and genuine affection, not obligation and convenience. And if the people in your life can't provide those things, you deserve the courage to build a new life with people who can. Sometimes the best inheritance isn't money or property. Sometimes it's the strength to finally demand the love and respect you've always deserved. Never forget your worth, never settle for less than you deserve, and never, ever stop believing that you are worthy of authentic, unconditional love. That's where real wealth begins. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.